What is your name?
Well, my name is actually Michael David Finnis. My entire family goes by middle names, which makes things kind of awkward. But I think people will know me as David because that's what was always used. So I was born in 1958. I was born in Victoria. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, which, if people know downtown Victoria, is basically right down on, I believe it's on Humboldt, down near St. Anne's Academy and close to the Empress Hotel and all of that. So they're now apartments. I went to the University of Victoria and got a history degree with a lot of urban geography and political science courses. I did go back and get a second bachelor's degree when my wife at the time was doing an education degree. So graduated again. First degree was graduated in 1980, and then got a geography degree and graduated in 85.
Was there a specific reason you decided to move to Summerland?
Yeah, so we came down in 1989, had been in the Nass Valley, had been in Kincola, the Gingolaks, a little Niska village at the mouth of the Nass River. Beautiful spot, had been there since the fall of 1986 through 89. My wife was a teacher up there. I ended up being teaching assistant up there. But one of our colleagues and neighbors and friends, Ted Coombs, he had a friend down in Summerland who said, "Hey, there's a teaching job coming up, learning assistants." And it was actually Amy Yamabe, who I'm sure many people will know, the late Amy Yamabe. And so she was retiring. So Sue and Dan flew down, stayed with the only people we knew in Summerland at the time, which was Tim and Liz DC. And so we moved to Summerland that summer. There we go. And we were there I think I was there for 26 years. It was a very interesting time because it was kind of at that start of a real change in population numbers to Summerland. It sort of did a big spurt of population growth right around, I think, just before we got there, and certainly in those first couple of years. And, it changed, and, people were apprehensive of it. And it certainly did change quite a few things around because you did get a lot more people either retiring or moving in and looking for work or whatever. But it was definitely a time of transition.
Do you know what the population of Summerland was around that time?
I think it was close to 10, or became about around 10,000. I got there and, pretty soon after being there, the first revitalization project was happening and things like that downtown. They'd done the theme. Different things were disappearing, like the sawmill and other stuff that was mentioned in the other interview. So it was changing in those ways.
You have served as a Summerland counselor. You did it about 3 different terms. While serving in that position, did you kind of have any maybe policies you introduced and then had a lasting effect on Summerland?
Well, the first thing is I ran in 1990. So I'd been there about a year, right? And almost made it. I seesawed back and forth, 6th and 7th spot, on there that night. But the interesting thing with that election, there was myself and Jeff Miller was another newcomer to town, and we both were running for different positions. And at the forum, people are talking about, well, I've been in Summerland since, and whatever distant, or my great grandfather came here, and everybody was giving their pedigree of how long they had lived in town. Except for Jeff and I. We just basically came in and said who we were, and this is what we would like to do, and these are the things we'd like to see happen, and blah, blah, blah. And I remember afterwards talking to somebody from the radio station saying, I should have just got up there and said, "I'm David Finnis, I've been here 20 minutes, kind of thing." Because it was just such a contrast. But later on, I ran again in 93, and that's when there was quite a switchover. People basically tossed out people before, and it was an entirely new council other than Sheila White. And this was the council that then dealt with the sewer project, something that none of us had expected we would be dealing with, and especially some of us, it was about the last thing we thought we would do. It was also, I found it was an extremely exciting term on council because it was, that's a massive thing to undertake, but we also had really great teamwork and a really great group of people to brainstorm and talk stuff. And we spanned the spectrum from, quite a libertarian mayor and other people on the right to people more in the center and people like me who are, left of center. And yet we would talk about this type of plant. We ended up with obviously the biological nutrient removal BNR plant in Trout Creek, but we looked at doing spray irrigation like in Vernon. We brainstormed other stuff for the more rural areas, different kinds of septic fields, all sorts of stuff. And so we would toss out an idea and then we'd get it, and then we'd go and chat about it and we go, no, it's not going to work or whatever. But we were free to talk about a lot more stuff. I found in my very last term, people have been kind of pigeonholed into sides of pro this or anti this or whatever, which wasn't always true, and it was tougher to have those kind of much more frank, just, because you'd sort of say something and people go, oh, it's this person or that person, and just totally disregard it. So I think that was a great thing in that first term.
What years do you serve as a counselor?
So I was 93 to 96, and then 96 to 99, which was a very interesting election because we had like 7 people for 6 spots or something. That council was a bit more dysfunctional because of some of the people going on there. And then a number of us lost in 99, including myself. And then I came back in 2005 to 2008. So, a 6-year gap or whatever there. One actually interesting on that first election, like when I got elected in 93, we had moved to 3-year terms. 90 they were still on the 2-year terms every 2 years. So half the council one time and half the council kind of thing. And then it evolved to the entire council. And then it's now, I believe, 4 years, which is, pretty serious time commitment for people to look at. But in some ways, it gives you a little bit more continuity in the middle, years, because your first year can be kind of a real learning curve for a lot of people, depending on what they've done and how much they've watched and all of that. And then the final year, they used to, there was a term they would had for it, but, where people were just kind of watching either because they were going to leave or they were running for re-election, so that impacted what they said or didn't say. Times have changed a lot since then. Some of the stuff that I brought forward are now just normal. I mean, I brought forward a bylaw on low-flow toilets, because of water use and consumption. Where, sometimes a pretty dry area, not a lot of rainfall, droughts, et cetera, et cetera, And I mean, that's the basic stuff now is just part of the normal building code, but at the time it was not. So that was one of the things. I brought forward a bylaw on warning signs about the dangers of fetal alcohol syndrome. So the dangers of drinking during pregnancy. And this was to go into, any place selling alcohol to warn everybody. The other big one that I did, which was a bylaw, was the clean air one on smoking. And I was able to partner with Julia Barche, who was involved with YES, which I believe was Youthful Energetic Seniors. And we pushed for that. And it went beyond, at the time, people were smoking everywhere. And, so it went beyond the thing of having the invisible line down the middle of a restaurant to say this is no smoking and this is non-smoking. But people were smoking, in clothing stores. People were smoking in hardware stores, next to the paint cans and the varnish and flammable liquids. I mean, I'd come from Victoria where, the fire marshal had said, thou shalt not do that, right? It wasn't, it was just for safety, pure safety reasons. And I remember once being in Giant Foods and watching cigarette ash fall onto, the broccoli in the produce section and go, ooh, this isn't so good. So that was one of the things we accomplished, but it was a struggle because people were kind of afraid, well, people go to Penticton or somewhere else, and you're going like, they've actually done more than we have. I mean, this was the irony. I had come from the North Coast. Prince Rupert, which probably had about 4 times as many smokers as Summerland did, just because of, the demographics of the community, had enacted bylaws about where you could and couldn't smoke in terms of inside malls and this and that and stuff. So it was kind of like, I'm coming from, smoker's paradise almost to the Okanagan. And I don't know, it was kind of an eye-opener to me about stuff. And also that, I don't know, I think we were a little bit more insular at the time. When I first arrived, that first year or two is fine, when they widened the highway to Penticton. But, so it was much more, I think, of a self-contained community in many ways. If you look at the kind of stores that were downtown that are not there anymore, like television stores, clothing stores and stuff like that. So I think that was part of it too. But there was just that mentality about, oh, what does the rest of the world do? That was actually one of the disappointments I found on council too, was like trying to get people, like in those first couple of years, we all went as a council to the Union of BC Municipalities Convention, UBCM. And we did that because we were lobbying for, asking for things like money for a sewer plant, money for other infrastructure projects that we felt the community needed. Now you've got more people who kind of pride themselves, well, I had no councillor expenses. And you're going, you have no councillor expenses because you don't attend anything outside the community. And, in one sense, yeah, okay, you save the town money, but you're also not interacting. You're not talking to your colleagues elsewhere. You're not talking to other levels of government. You're not getting information from industry and business over, hey, this project works really well. You're not talking to real estate people and others in the building trades about, the kind of housing we could have or could, might want to look at. You're not chatting to people that have laneway houses and is this a good idea or not a good idea? So, that's the advantage, I think, of when people actually go off and participate outside their community in different events. The other great thing we did, we looked at and we sold a slight bit of property off Little Giant's Head to the Glenford School when Glenford came around. And as part of that process, because they needed a little bit that was municipal and it was on flat on a old road bed or something, I was able to convince the rest of council, well, the rest of Giant's Head, because it's all a hill and we're not going to build on it, should be, zoned park. So I always felt really great about that. I don't know if it's got full park. I don't think it's ever got full park status to stop, somebody doing something to it, which is similar to quite a few of the parks around the community, but it was definitely, I thought that was one step in the right direction.
You actually served initially as the KVSR's counselor representative. Do you have any kind of stories related to that?
Yeah, one of the neat things, I don't know if they still do it, but we certainly did back then, is we had council liaisons on all sorts of different organizations and committees and stuff around the community. And one was with the Kettle Valley and was there when, they were first lobbying. The first thing was when they approached the district to say, hey, we're trying to preserve, 14-kilometer stretch, from basically the trestle out to Falder, to do, to run a historic train on kind of thing. And so don't let the tracks get pulled kind of thing. And that was really interesting because, they came to us and they were talking, the mayor's all gung-ho, we'll write this letter, we'll definitely support it. And somebody from Public Works goes, you realize we're going to have to, if they get this up and going, we're going to put stop signs and crossing guard signs and whatnot at every, level crossing. And he's going, oh. And he balked at it. You're looking at $2,000 to do signage or have this incredible tourism draw. And we almost lost it because of, over $2,000 worth of signs. But no, it did come. And it was great. And it was neat to be involved with it and watch it evolve from, restoring the tracks to then restoring a train and then getting an engine and then getting another one and all the different things that they went through, which was, pretty complex. I had the good fortune at one point actually to work when they were doing just the run from West Summerland, where the little kiosk is and the museum and different things used to be and whatnot, to the trestle. And I was working at Summerland Suites and I got to walk down there and greet them and bring them back up and give them a tour of the building and take them back down. It was really neat to be directly involved in it. And one of the things that I struggled with and tried to do and was work with people like Alan Forsdick and others from the chamber to say, we need to integrate tourism more. Because we didn't, we'd kind of do it, but they're not all integrated. And it was trying to, at one point, was trying to get a group together where people in the B&B section, this is before Airbnb, but, there was an association of bed and breakfast, there were the motels, and others within active in tourism together to, and also, partly just to tour facilities, they get to know each other. And so that when somebody stays at your place, you go like, oh, yeah, visit the train, visit Summerland Suites, visit Sumac Ridge Winery. I think there were that many other wineries at the time, visit the tourism places, whether the hatchery at the lower town. But, but if you know what they are and you've been there yourself, it's a lot easier to be, to promote them and stuff. So gaining that knowledge. But yeah, no, one of the things that I think still has never happened is there is nothing downtown about the train, which I find absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, there's a few signs that the town, the district has put up along the road, going out along Prairie Valley and elsewhere, and there's ones obviously on the highway that the Ministry of Transportation has put up or permitted to be put up. But there's nothing downtown. Surely we could have a model of a train. We could have something. We could have a sculpture. We should have something. We should have signage. I mean, we've got this massive tourism draw, and we're not really using it. And I've always felt that's a bit of a, that's really unfortunate.
You also served on a couple of commissions too while you were a counselor. One of them was the Heritage Advisory Commission.
Yeah, I was on that. And that was, so there were two kinds of things we did. We had the liaisons to organizations that were not municipal, like committee, well, like the Arts Council, like the KVR, and I can't remember what any of the others would have been. And then there were some municipal ones, and the Heritage Advisory was definitely one of them. And that was to look at, what heritage places do we have in town? How can we protect them or enhance them or do whatever? And it was, yeah, that was a really neat one to be involved with. I was on the Recreation Commission, but that was, again, it was an internal one. And that made me chair of the Recreation Commission, being a counselor, because it was a council person, then about 4 people from the community. And at the time, the rec director was Dale McDonald, and he was great. And he would, bring, these are the ideas, we need to have, we're adjusting the fees and charges, taking into account inflation. And, as he always said, it costs more to every year to either freeze water or heat water for the pool and the ice rink and the curling rink, things like that. But the other neat thing there is we would be looking at, I found that commission and him in particular had a really great long range plan. There were ideas like, we want to do this. We want to develop this ball field and then this ball field and this little park. And we're going to work together with a community group to get money to do the little playground that's at Julia and Victoria Road, or other places, right? So there was that kind of like, and it wasn't a response, like, oh, what should we do this year? It was kind of like this year, and everything was kind of very logical and laid out and budgeted for. I mean, he was putting money into fixing the road that leads to the top of Giant's Head so that it's, became really well paved. You can have longboard skating on it now, that you couldn't have had if that money had not been set aside year by year by year to do it, when it was appropriate. So, yeah. The other thing that I got appointed to on, in that term, those 2 terms on the 90s was the Okanagan Regional Library Board. Sheila White had basically timed out, that there were time limits on how long you could represent the community. So I got to be Summerland's rep on the Okanagan Regional Library Board, and that was an interesting one. That was actually one of the neat things when I was on the board. I was one of the few actual representatives from the library board who actually visited libraries. Many of them don't actually have library cards. Many of them, they don't even visit. They rarely visit the library within their community, but I visited other ones when I was traveling through and got to see them and kind of, again, it's one of those things that's really nice to know about a building that, if you're talking about moving from this place to this place, and you can actually visualize it, know it, and chat to the staff there, I think you can do a lot better job. One of the neat things we did on my first term, well, we didn't, but they arranged when we were first, because we were all newcomers to council, was they toured municipal facilities. I mean, some of them you can get into. You can obviously go into and look at the swimming pool and the fitness center and stuff like that. You can if it's going to still be open. But for some of the people I was there, they had not been in since they last took their kids swimming like 10 years before. But nobody even went in. But places like the public works yard, you're not going to get into, or now the water treatment plant, which we did not have. But you can get into things. I mean, I got some great tours of the fire department when my kids were preschoolers and kindergartners, because you get to go to those things and see this stuff in a different way. But I mean, those are the things when you can, especially I think it's good for council and others or any organization, if you're part of it, is to go and look at your facility and know what it's like, or the facilities that you're in charge of, and see them. On the ground, you get a much better understanding. Oh, the other one, when we're looking at committees that we had, is we struck a waste management one with people from the community. And they were great because they brainstormed different things about the landfill. What can we do at the landfill to make it more efficient? One of the things that I'd been involved with before getting first elected in 93 was the Summerland Environmental Society, I believe. And one of the things that we did is we lobbied for the compost project and got it going. And that was, it was dealing with yard waste and, orchard prunings and that kind of stuff, because there was a lot of organic waste that ends up at the Summerland landfill that at that time was buried. I remember my neighbor, when I'd look at, like 5 or 6 black plastic bags full of lawn clippings, because he'd have this immaculate lawn and then send everything out there, and it was ridiculous. But so that was one of the things that that group was able to get the town to, started on. And then eventually, there's now curbside um, yard waste collection. There's even, I believe, they take food waste, which is, quite substantial when you start to look at, the amount of stuff that, we green bin or, that is kitchen waste, which is not leftovers, but is, potato peelings and apple cores and, stuff like that. There's, so it pulls a lot of stuff out of waste streams.
You gave us a large collection of photos, and you told me that you took those for meetings that you would have with other counselors. Was that the main drive, is to kind of have like a visual representation?
It was, yeah. I think the photos, especially the two. I think there were two photo albums or binders of printed photos, like because this is pre-digital times, right? So two things. One is at the time when the planner would talk about something, it would be an overhead acetate kind of thing, right? So it's a two-dimensional drawing. There's no color pictures. There's no little video clips of anything. So it's kind of, this is what it looks like. And most of it was like schematic maps, like we're going to look at this and it might show the road and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily show situation and what's around you and all of that. And so I always felt it was important to go out and look at properties that were being discussed. We had a couple of people on council who had, an incredible depth of knowledge based on their job occupations and length of time living there. And they could always talk about places. And it was interesting because poor Gord Morley would be the planner and he'd be there talking about some property to give the physical address. And they're going, oh, that's the so-and-so's place. And it wasn't actually occupied by that family anymore, but 20 years ago it had been. But that's how you referred to it. But I always found it really helpful to go out and look. And then when we're coming back, I can pull the pictures out and go, yeah, that's what it's like, because there is a view of the lake that is going to disappear if somebody does this, or the people, or, whatever it was, the topography is quite different, and it just gave you a feel for things. I remember once in Victoria when I was at university and the school district was going to close the neighborhood school that was a block and a half from my house. And there was a furor because of what it would do to the neighborhood in terms of, well, if there's not a school, nobody with families will move in. So you will really make the neighborhood decline. But the other thing was, well, they can go to these other two schools. And I'm going, there's hills according to those other two schools. And, for adults, you get in a four-wheeled vehicle and you drive it. So it's no big deal. It's huge if you're a child walking it. Coming back to Summerland, I remember one time we were talking about a little parklet, not much of anything, up at Deer Ridge. And, well, you got the thing at Dale Meadows. I'm going, do you know how steep Morrow Avenue is? You're driving a vehicle, you're not a 8-year-old trying to get there, to play soccer, to play ball, to play whatever. And I think those are the important things. And that's part of it, like why I would go places, but it's also why I took a lot of the photos is because, I could look at it and go, yeah, it's steep. It's not, it's this is what's around it. Later as you move into the fire danger and you're worried about, how close are the trees, have they been thinned, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot to be gained by actually seeing something on site or at least having the visual pictures. And that's why I took the initial ones. A lot of the other ones were, I just took as I went around later as we had a digital camera and sometimes just as a tourist. And then I thought, well, I thought they might be useful one day for the library or the museum rather to have them and people can look back and you can spot, you spot the changes because you see when certain buildings have been created or whatever, like what year was Dale Meadows ballpark put in, and you see it before and after, right? And as I remember it, I'll bring back one of the other groups that I was assigned as both a liaison and then I think just as a community member got appointed to was CCDC, the Community Cultural Development Commission. And that's the joke, the one that some of us joked, we were muralizing Summerland one wall at a time because that's the group that painted the band shell. That's the group that put the murals on the washrooms down at Peach Orchard and Rotary Beach. It's also the group, though, that put the mural on the overpass where Peach Orchard goes under the highway. We were the first community to get permission to paint a mural on a highway infrastructure like that, right? And that took a lot of going and, a lot of energy for the people that were involved in trying to get that to happen. But that's one of the neat things, there's murals around town. Some of them were done by the BIA with Ron Soulier painting them, and others were done, elsewhere. But, part of it just made the community nicer.
I believe you served as the federal NDP candidate for the Okanagan region, and you did that twice, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Was there a specific reason you decided to do that?
Well, the first time was 1997, and we had a contested nomination between myself, a fellow from Merritt, and somebody from Costin area. And that was when we were Okanagan Coquihalla, and we ran, up to West Bank, which was not incorporated at the time, over to Merritt, Princeton, Arameus. We actually went all the way to Hope. We all went all the way to beautiful Popcom, if people know where Bridal Falls and the Popcom sign is on the highway there. And it was quite interesting because every community wanted to have a forum. And they were literally every other day. So I spent a lot of time on the road, driving between communities because there wasn't a lot, and it was interesting because Hope, we had, I think, the best line of the entire election. We had about 11 candidates or something because, that was the Reform Party was the current, Jim Hart was the current MP. There was a Liberal. My council colleague, Ramesh Riki, ran for the Progressive Conservatives. I was the New Democrat. We had an independent. We had the Christian Heritage Party, and probably had somebody else. And in Hope, though, because they were all going like, what are we doing? We should be with Chilliwack. Our school district goes to Chilliwack. Our health region goes to Chilliwack. The regional district goes west into the Fraser Valley, blah, blah, blah. And the Christian Heritage guy gets up and he goes, welcome to the Okanagan. And the place just kind of burst out into laughter, because it was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, so that was the first one. And that was really neat. And when it was interesting because both Ramesh and I were, out campaigning, but I think we made every single council meeting that we had during that time. And then in 2011, I ran and had been renamed Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola, or Cossin, Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola. And that was really interesting. I joked at the end. I mean, doubled the vote and whatnot for us. That was a lot of fun. Had really good times with, my Green and Liberal colleagues and stuff. And then if I had run in Quebec, I'd probably have been a member of Parliament. Before the 97 thing, I had been pretty quiet with my partisan affiliate because I was trained to be as much as you can, obviously political, but non-partisan. And I tried to do that later on as well. That when you're there to represent the community, you're there to look at everything. And, obviously everything influences you from your background to your work environment has some bearing on it, but, trying not to be, capital P partisan. So that kind of changed things. And that's probably why that final term, 2003 to 08 was, or 5 rather to 08 is kind of different because, branded is something as other people were branded because they were business people or whatever, we all get pigeonholed sadly. And that's, I think, kind of an unfortunate thing. And I'm sure it doesn't happen just in Summerland, but it certainly did there.
You have served with or on the council, the Summerland Community Art Council. What year did you join and why did you decide to join originally?
I've been trying to remember the exact year and I honestly don't know. And I'm not certain if my first involvement was as a council liaison rep, which it could well have been. And then just from a personal interest, I am not an artist other than, I enjoy taking photographs, but do not paint, do not make pottery, do not like this, never have, can't view myself as that. I've just always had liked it, like painting behind us, and other things, like acquiring art and seeing it and looking at it. So sometime in the 90s, I got involved. I did at one point when the municipal hall was moving from, Main Street to its place on Henry Avenue, and the building was going to become vacant. It was definitely a big part of my election campaign. And, at every forum was that building would make a great art center. It's publicly owned. We already own it. We got superseded by the Glenford School because they would pay rent, um, and it went to them. We did eventually get it, and so maybe advocating for it helped prepare people for it because here was a facility that the town owns, and now what are they going to do with it? But yeah, so that was my initial involvement with them. I sat on the board at one point, and that was probably obviously outside of council. It was just me, being interested in the arts, being involved when we did the black and white, the fancy dinners. We did the Cafe Noir, other events. Eventually, I took over for Ruth Manning to do the arts palette column in the Summerland Review newspaper, which at that time was only in the newspaper, and it was, this is what's happening in the arts, basically in our community. And then it morphed later on into being an online thing, especially when the review kind of disappeared from being a print form. So I can't remember exactly when I took over from Ruth, but yeah. And I ended up becoming president, I discovered just around 2014, which is when the building that we were in got sold to the library. And that was a really tough one for us because I think we all wanted the library to have a better spot. But we had just done some renovations, and all of a sudden, the rug got pulled out from under us. And I mean, obviously, they couldn't tell us that, they're in chats about selling a building and couldn't stop us spending several thousands of dollars or whatever we spent on doing some renovations. But it was kind of frustrating. And then it was a scramble, like, now what? Where do we go? Kind of thing. But yeah. But part of the challenge was always trying to, get the community recognize the value of the arts in the community. That it can be important. It's a tourism thing. It's a recreational thing. I mean, tons of people go to the art club and the different painting groups. But yeah, the Arts Council, it was wonderful to be involved, and it's really great to, still be involved doing the arts palette many years later. When I moved away in 2015, it was kind of like, oh, who would like to do the arts palette? And no volunteers came forward. So I ended up, fortunately, it's electronic. One of the nice things about me doing it, though, is, it gives me a connection back to the community and beyond, because I post stuff that is happening up in Peachland or West Kelowna or Oliver, or Penticton, whatever I can find. So I spend a lot of time scouring Facebook and other things to try to find these different events that are taking place. The downside is, I'm not there to see a poster. If somebody doesn't post it online and they post it in the bulletin board that's the parking lot by the post office, or that excellent community bulletin board that's in the credit union, every time I up, I always go into the credit union one to see what's there, because there's stuff there that isn't somewhere else, and I can go, take a snapshot of that poster and include it if I can. But yeah, no, it's been fun, and that's one of the ways I keep in touch with the community, and hopefully something that is beneficial. Yeah, I was involved in a few different community groups. I was never part of a service club per se. Certainly worked with them, and met with them and chatted with them, and probably was liaison, or like we'd go to functions. But no, I had been involved with South Okanagan Victims Assistance Society, the South Okanagan Women in Need Society, Amnesty International. We had a great group in Penticton, helped do their December 10th vigils which is Human Rights Day, for quite a few years. There were a couple of us involved with Summerland United and St. Stephen's Anglican. The other two fellows were teachers. We helped with the White Ribbon campaign following the massacre in the Club Polytechnique, and the whole raising the issue of men's violence towards women. So we did various things like that. Yeah.
And I believe you were actually a librarian in West Kelowna while you were living in Summerland for a time.
Yes. One of the upsides, on a personal note, for losing in '99 is, it was kind of like, oh gosh, now what? Is that I ended up no longer being on the library board, which meant that when a position came up at the West Bank branch in what has now become West Kelowna, I was able to apply. I got a very limited part-time thing of like 12 hours a week, 3-4 hour shifts or something. And then it eventually morphed into more. I actually had a year at Oliver, which was in my beginning time with the library, I was not a librarian. I'm a library clerk, so there's, not a professional librarian going to library school. The Okanagan Regional Library has very few of those people. Most of us were people that, for whatever reason, we love books, we like working with the public, all of that kind of stuff. So I worked up there for well, 15 years basically, from 2000 to 2015. And it was great. I got to do, one of the things they said is, guess what? You get to do your role includes story time. And I'm like, oh, I'd been a story time dad, but, or a stay at home dad rather. But, so I went and talked to Liz Minty and people that I knew because she had ran the puddle or the puddle jumpers program at the arena banquet hall where my boys had gone, and was trying to get ideas and others from town that I knew and stuff. And I'd taken my kids to story time. But yeah, so that was fun. But one of the great things with that is I got to visit the elementary schools in West Kelowna, and so I got to go to all of them and promote the summer reading program that we offered at the library. So that was wonderful. At one point, somebody went on holidays before I got more hours at West Bank, and I got to fill in for a couple of weeks at the Summerland branch. And I was living on Elliott Street across from the Baptist Church at the time, and sadly, that was the only time I got to work there. But it was kind of ironic. I lived in Summerland. I was the closest person that they had to that branch, and that's the only one time I got to work there. And I got to drive north to West Bank, sometimes into Rutland, Mission Branch, Lake Country. Naramata one time, Caledon. It was good. So yeah, we moved from Summerland to Vancouver in the August of 2015. We both took early retirement. My wife had worked for Interior Health. I'd worked obviously for the library. I did go back about in 2016 to 2019, working part-time for Burnaby Public Library as a library clerk at their McGill branch, and well, one or two of the others on call, but basically the McGill branch, which is Willingdon and Hastings, for those that know the Vancouver, which was really nice because, 57 was a little early to take full-on retirement. But we basically came down because we knew within a year we would have the first of the grandkids would arrive, because that had been the plan, come down and be, helpful. So that's why we came. It's why we chose, where we located was done very much within the community, that we would have that access, easy access. It's really interesting. It was fun. It's a wonderful little community, smaller community. I mean, it's not little, but like one of the things we miss is being able to walk into the grocery store. I mean, I recognize a couple of the cashiers, but I rarely see, once in a while I've seen my neighbors in there, but, used to have conversations with people all the time, well, it was back in the day too, when more stuff was paper money and you actually withdrew paycheck money and cash checks and stuff. So I went in the credit union a lot more than I would have now. But, it was always wonderful going in there and chatting with the tellers there, going to the two grocery stores, going into other places, the post office people, other stores. And that's one of the things we definitely miss, seeing people on the street. And even friends that we didn't see very often, we would always see them at Festival of Lights. And if we didn't see them at Festival of Lights, we'd see them at some other big event that the community was hosting. You kind of guaranteed that you'd see them at something.
And do you still visit Summerlin somewhat frequently?
We do. My wife, Kathy, was born there. Born in the old hospital, actually born on the one that was on Solly Hill, went to school, graduated from there. So for her, grew up. Yeah, so we do get up. I mean, we don't get up quite as often as we can. At one point when we had moved down, we ended up with a very small place on Snow Avenue up near Sumac Ridge and the Living Memorial ball fields and stuff. And so that was nice. We actually went there for, I think, 8 weeks during the first start of COVID, because we could kind of hibernate and do walks through the vineyard, the rural parts, without encountering people and all of that stuff that we all did during that. But it was wonderful, no. So, I mean, again, we don't have that property, but it was really nice to have it for that time that we had it for several years.
Do you have any kind of hopes for Summerland?
I mean, it's a wonderful community. It's got a lot going for it. I think it always will. It's an idyllic setting, and partly because the land reserve keeps a lot of it from being built on. But I mean, the natural surroundings are glorious. At one point when I lived over on Theed Crescent, and I would look out my great big plate glass window of this, half, 1.5 story house or whatever, and I looked at the flagboard in that hill, which I believe is, actually a park that nobody can really get to, but just being able to have that view and that unaltered state of thing is important. It's when people can look at Giant's Head and just see the top of it, or Cartwright Mountain. So, there's a lot of stuff that they need to protect. There's a lot of stuff that they've got going for it. I mean, I really hope, obviously big problem is employment for those that are actually have working age. I mean, it's a quarter of the population are retired, but you those who are not, Grant said school is closed, which is really sad for those, and kids, and then it alters where you can live and move and everything else within the community. My eldest son was the first group that went to the middle school, which is now an elementary school. um, you know, Seeing those changes is tough. But I mean, there's a lot of great changes too. I mean, I look at some of the cycling infrastructure, you look at some of the other infrastructure that's been built and done, and the enhancements, which have happened, the two downtown vital was it revitalization projects, I think make it look really nice. I remember back in the day, I mean, I got a different way of doing the banners now. They get 5 or 6 people and then they, mass produce that design. But back in the day, they had individuals do them. And I remember one time my youngest son, Stephen, was at Giant's Head, and we would walk around downtown and we would look at the banners because 3/4 of them at least had been made by kids in his class. And, he didn't do one that was up there, but his classmates did. And so that sense of, and I don't think people realize that in the community, the sense of connection that people get because, their kids participate in something like that. We're always talking about keeping kids busy and, how do they get a feel for their community and, blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, these are younger kids, they're not high school kids, but I mean, it was great. They got that real attachment. One of the things I've always liked, and I'm glad to see David Gregory keeping it going, is, I think they're adding a few more banners as the memorial banners for Remembrance Day. They do a few of them around here, but it's not quite the same because they're, you know the family or you recognize the family name, you see the street, those connections are there. And I mean, I think that and the new work they've done on some of where they've replaced, the cenotaph and stuff, the gathering spots, that all of that is encouraging. There's just, and hopefully, if they coordinate better with the train, they can do something downtown for that, and get all that stuff going. But yeah, it's a wonderful spot. I really hope it does well over the years. I'm sure it will.